to teach you neuroanatomy. Neuroanatomy is a very important part of your anatomy because it deals with the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves that exit the spinal cord, and also it is very important because it's the prime controller of the entire body. What is the necessity for you to study neuroanatomy, you might wonder, because it's the controller of the entire body and all the functions of the body, and you need to learn the anatomy and the physiology of the nerves and all the other functions, and that's what we're going to learn here. First, we start with the central nervous system. The central nervous system is divided into two, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and then you have the peripheral nervous system. We are also going to learn about how the transmission of nerve impulses take place for the signals to reach the brain, and from there how the order is given to the nerves to perform even simple functions. So before we go into this, we are going to learn about what is the necessity to learn about the nervous system. First, the nervous system or the nerves, it detects and responds to the changes inside and outside the body. It is in contact with the endocrine system. You might wonder what is the need for the nerves to contact the endocrine system. Every time whenever you feel the brain asks the endocrine system to produce certain hormones, and these hormones are released in response to the stimuli that takes place. Together it controls and coordinates with the functions of the body. The nervous system provides immediate response, providing the hormones that are necessary for the action. The nervous system also maintains the homeostasis of the body. For those of you who don't understand the word homeostasis, homeostasis is the ability of the brain or the nervous system to maintain the internal stability of an organism to compensate for environmental changes. So if you would wonder what this is, for example, when it is very hot outside, your body temperature is regulated, and when it is very cold outside, again your body doesn't get very cold, your temperature still maintains. So all these regulations are called as homeostasis. The nervous system and the endocrine system controls many vital aspects of the body. Now, going to the nervous system, as I said before, the nervous system can be divided into two major components, central and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is comprised of brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is comprised of the nerves that comes out of the brain or the spinal cord, and these are the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, all the other nerves. The peripheral nerves can be divided into two types. One is the paired cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves which help in very important functions of the body, which we are not going to learn now. We are going to learn in the later classes. Then we have the sacral nerves. So from the name itself you can understand the cranial nerves are those that come out of the brain, and the sacral nerves are those that come out of the spinal cord. Now these two nerves, the cranial nerves and the sacral nerves, perform two functions. One is the sensory function and the other is the motor function, or it could be a combination of both. The sensory function is also called as afferent function. It is called afferent because it's the first thing that starts, and then you have the motor function, which is called the efferent function. We will remember motor because it needs some effort, so you can remember it as efferent. So motor function is also efferent function. Motor nerves involves in two kinds of activities. The motor nerve or the efferent nerve, the two kinds of activities by the motor nerve are voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary is also called as somatic function. Involuntary is also called as autonomic function. Autonomic is something like automatic, It happens without us even realizing it's happening. The voluntary function is done by the somatic nervous system. The involuntary function is done by autonomic nervous system. You might wonder, what is this involuntary function that happens in our body? The involuntary functions are those that happen in the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle and the glands. Smooth muscles are seen in your digestive system. The cardiac muscle helps in pumping the blood to the heart and out of the heart. And the glands that synthesizes hormones like growth hormone, pituitary glands, all this. Then the involuntary function itself is divided into two. One is the sympathetic function and the other one is the parasympathetic function. The sympathetic function works only during emergency. For example, you stand in front of a snake. You didn't even realize its presence. You see it. First you get frightened. And then your brain takes you a little further if you want to fight the snake or run away from the snake. So during these situations, the sympathetic nervous system is what that works. And the other thing is the parasympathetic functions, which happens at the time of non-emergency. Your daily digestion, your time of sleeping, your time of breathing, all these happen with the parasympathetic nervous system. This is just a diagram that I have taken from your textbook. This is first the impulse that happens outside. For example, if you touch a hot object, the sensory nerves take the impulse to the brain, telling that you have touched a hot object. These are the other sensory receptors that are there in the body. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue and your touch. The touch can be your fingertips or anywhere else in the body. And then you have the chemoreceptors, baroreceptors and the osmoregulators. I think you know what the chemoreceptors are. The chemical receptions, the ones that regulate the temperature of your body, and all these sends the signal to the brain. From the brain, for example, as I said before, when you touch something hot, the impulse is sent to the brain and immediately the brain sends the signal by the motor nerves for you to withdraw your hands. So these are the effector organisms. For somatic, which is your voluntary one, you voluntarily pull your hand out. And then you have the skeletal muscle. The autonomic one is the cardiac muscle, the smooth muscles of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Now this is the structure of a nerve cell. Every nerve is composed of tiny components. Just like how every tissue, every organ is made up of numerous components, the nerve cell is also the smallest component of a nerve. The nerve cell has got many parts. First, it has a cell body. The cell body is what that is present in the top, and then it has these hairy projections called the dendrites, and then it has a nucleus in the center. The cell body at the junction is called the axon, and now the axon goes into a covering called the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is something that is like the jacket for the entire nerve cell. It is made up of many layers, and there are two kinds of nerve cell that you are going to learn. One is the myelinated nerve and the other one is the non or the unmyelinated nerve. It has got the myelin sheath, and in the middle of the myelin sheath you have something called as the Schwann cell. There is a connection between one myelin sheath to the other, and it is called as node of Ranvier. And the end of the nerve cell, the tip of the nerve cell, you have something called as the axon terminal. Now we learned here the top portion of the nerve cell is the cell body. The cell body forms the grey matter. Now we all would have heard of grey matter and white matter. We are going to learn in elaborate in this chapter. The grey matter, it is found by the cell body. It is found in the periphery of the brain, as in it lines the outer lining of the brain, and it is present in the center of the spinal cord. The grey matter, remember, is found in the periphery of the brain and in the center of the spinal cord. The group of cell bodies together, as in collection of 2-3 cell bodies put together, is called the nuclei. Now it is called as nuclei in the central nervous system, but when it comes to peripheral nervous system, it is called as ganglia. I think you would have heard about the word ganglia, people having ganglias in their hands and all those. So this is what it is. So there is an exception in this. There is something called as a basal ganglia, which is a collection of cell bodies that is present in the cerebrum. You will learn you will learn why it is called basal ganglia when we go to the brain and when we read in detail about the cerebrum. The axon and the dendrites are the extensions of the cell body. Here we learned there is a cell body. The axon and the dendrites are extensions of the cell body. Now going to the axon and the dendrites. First we learnt about the cell body. The cell body form the grey matter. The grey matter is present in the periphery of the brain. The grey matter is also found in the center of the spinal cord. The collection of 2-3 cell bodies, we learnt it as ganglia, nucleus in the brain and ganglia outside the brain. Now we also learned that there is an exception called the basal ganglia, which is seen in the cerebrum. This basal ganglia was an important question of your previous years, so please remember that. Next we have the white matter. The axons and the dendrites are the extensions of the cell body and it forms the white matter. Axons are found deep in the brain and at the periphery of the spinal cord. Because the grey matter is found at the periphery of the brain, the white matter is found in the inside of the brain. And because the grey matter is found in the center of the spinal cord, the white matter is present around the spinal cord. So the axon found deep in the brain and at the periphery of the spinal cord in groups are called as tracts. Now we learned cell body in groups are called nuclei and ganglia. Axon as a group is called as tracts in the brain and the spinal cord, and in the peripheral nervous system it is referred to nerves or nerve fibers. So we learn about nuclei and ganglia, then we learn about tracts and nerve or nerve fibers. Next, each nerve has one axon, which is more like the neck of the entire nerve. Begins at tapered end of the cell body. So you see it tapering from the cell body, and this joint area is called the axon hillock. Hillock means a small mountain, small hill is called a hillock, the tiny one. More like that, there is an arrow in here and that's why it's called the axon hillock. The larger, the longer the dendrites is as long as 100 centimeters. Membranes of the axon is called as axolemma. There are membranes here, numerous layers of tissues that are present, which is called as axolemma, which encloses the cytoplasmic extensions of the cell body. You know, the cell body has got cytoplasm, and the axolemma, which is the layer of tissue, covers the cell body. Now, large axons and peripheral nerves are surrounded by myelin sheath, and it contains series of Schwann cells. Okay, the Schwann cells are arranged in the length of axon. You see here Schwann cell, all these are arranged in the length of the axon. Each is wrapped around the axon, covered by number of concentric layers of Schwann cell plasma membrane. Now when we learn about the transmission of nerve impulses and how there is an action potential, all that we are going to learn in the next few classes. There you will learn about plasma membrane. You shouldn't wonder where the plasma membrane is from. The plasma membrane is present in the Schwann cell. What is Schwann cell? This is the axon. The axon is covered by the Schwann cell plasma membrane. Between the layer of plasma membrane is a small amount of fatty substance called the myelin sheath. So this is the myelin sheath. What happens is, first you have the long axon. Covering the axon you have the, what is it, Schwann cell, and the tip of the Schwann cell there is something called as myelin sheath. The outermost layer of the Schwann cell plasma membrane is called as Neuroglia. See, until and unless you get these terms correct and you remember these terms, it's going to be very confusing. That's why I'm stressing on each and every word. Tiny areas of exposed axolemma. What did we learn was axolemma in the previous slide? What is axolemma? Where is it? Membranes of the axon is called axolemma, which encloses the cytoplasmic extension of the cell body. So axolemma contains cytoplasm, which is an extension of the cell body. And here what does it say? Between tiny areas exposed axolemma between adjacent Schwann cells are called nodes of Ranvier. This is that what we learned. And here so here the outermost layer is called the Neuroglia. Types, tiny areas of exposed axolemma between adjacent Schwann cells is called nodes of Ranvier. So all this we learn. Now going to the next one, neurons cannot divide and it needs oxygen and glucose for its survival. Glucose helps the neurons to synthesize ATP. Now neurons generate and transmit electrical impulses called the action potential. So what does the neuron do? It generates. Generates means it produces electric impulses, and whatever electric impulses it has generated, it will transmit the electric impulses from one nerve cell. A nerve cell is also called as a neuron to the other. Strength of the impulse is maintained throughout the length of the neuron. From the tip of the neuron till the end, the strength of the electric impulses or the action potential will be maintained. There are different types of neurons. The first one is the multipolar neurons, as in it has got many poles, all these different poles. Okay, and then you have the bipolar neurons, it's got two poles. Okay, and then you have pseudo unipolar neuron, which is a false pole, more like somewhere in the sides. And then you have the unipolar neuron, where it's there only in the center. Next, you have the myelinated and the unmyelinated neurons. The unmyelinated neurons are usually the sensory neurons. The myelinated ones are the motor neurons. So, all this time, what all did we learn? We learned about the central nervous system. The brain and the spinal cord form the central nervous system. Then we learned about the peripheral nervous system. We learned about the nerve cell, and we also learned about the different parts of the nerve cell. We learned about the different types of neurons, and also we are going to learn about the myelinated and the unmyelinated neuron. The myelinated and unmyelinated neuron was one of the short questions that had been asked in your previous question papers. The differences are here. I am going to share this PowerPoint to you so you can learn the differences. It is also seen in your textbook. This is just the biology of the nerve cell. I am not going to deal in detail about the nerve conduction because only if you are familiar with the other things you can follow the next classes. So I am just going to skip the nerve physiology and how the nerve impulses are being transmitted, and I am going to go straight into the nerve. First of all, you need to learn what a nerve is. A nerve consists of numerous neurons collected in a bundle of nerve fibers. In the central nervous system, it is known as tracts, and in the peripheral nervous system, it is known as nerve or nerve fibers. When you go into your next classes, there will be something called as tracts which come in the central nervous system. So when we read about the word tract, you should not get confused. It is nothing but the nerve in the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord. It is called as tracts. Okay. Next, each bundle has several connective tissue. First, what is the bundle? The bundle is nothing but collection of neurons. Numerous neurons are formed together to form a bundle, and it is called as tracts in the central nervous system and nerve fibers or nerve in the peripheral nervous system. These bundles have several connective tissues. There are three different connective tissues that are present surrounding these neurons or bundle of neurons. One is the endoneurium. Endo itself, it is understood, it is somewhere inside. Delicate tissues surrounding each individual fibers, which continues with the septa. What is a septa? Septa is nothing but a partition that passes inward into the perineurium. Endoneurium means it is delicate tissue, as in very thin layer of tissue surrounding each individual fiber, which is continuous with the septa that passes inwards into the perineurium. Peri itself, you can understand, it is something that is surrounding something. Smooth connective tissue surrounding each bundle of fiber. So each bundle of fiber is surrounded by perineurium. Then you have something called as epineurium. Epineurium means it is something that is present in the outside. A fibrous tissue which surrounds and encloses number of bundles of nerve fibers of nerve is called as epineuriums. Here you have the blood vessels, and here you have all the other structures. Next, going to the sensory nerve or the afferent nerve. Sensory nerve carry information from the body to the spinal cord or the brain. Sensory nerve carry information from the body to the spinal cord and further to the brain. There is something called as sensory receptors. These are specialized ending of sensory neurons that respond to different stimuli inside and outside the body. What do you mean by sensory receptors? They are specialized endings of sensory nerves. The sensory nerve has got the specialized ends which respond to different stimuli inside and outside the body. Now, somatic, cutaneous or common senses. Somatic cutaneous means skin. Somatic means the entire body. We have skin all over the body. So what does it say? They originate in the skin. They are pain, touch, heat and cold. These are the different somatic cutaneous senses that are seen in the body. They are pain, touch, heat and cold. They are fine branching filament without myelin sheath. As I mentioned earlier, the unmyelinated nerve fibers are those of the sensory nerve. When stimulated, an impulse is generated and it's transmitted by the sensory nerve to the brain where sensation is perceived. See, this is how it happens. This you will understand after I finish the nerve impulses and nerve transmission. There is something called as proprioceptive sense. Proprioceptor. What do you understand by this word? It means it originates in the muscles and the joints, and it contributes to the maintenance of balance and posture. When you want to sit on a chair, if you are able to sit straight, it is because of proprioception. Some of you wear spectacles. When you take your spectacles off, you find it very difficult to walk. So when you wear your spectacles, you can walk properly. So all these are because of proprioception. It helps in the balance and the posture. Balance sometimes also happens in your ear. When you have an imbalance in your ear, as in one ear has got problem, you will not be able to maintain your posture. Something called as special senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste and balance. Now suddenly you sit here in the classroom and you hear a sound somewhere far away. It is also because of these non-myelinated nerve fibers which help in perceiving this sensory function. Next, going to the autonomic nerves. The autonomic nerves are also known as efferent nerves. Now, they originate in the internal organs, glands and tissues involved in reflex regulation of involuntary activity and visceral one. The motor or the efferent nerve, they originate in the brain and the spinal cord and the autonomic ganglia. Here the word ganglia is used because the nuclei that is present in the peripheral nervous system together form the ganglia. They transmit impulses to the effector organs, muscles and glands. Next we have something called as somatic nerves. The somatic nerves are involved in voluntary and reflex skeletal contraction. Now for example, suddenly you see something, when you see there is rain outside and you know if you go there you will get wet. So you pull yourself back. You voluntarily pull yourself back. So this is the somatic nerve function. There is something called as autonomic nerve function, which involves the cardiac and the smooth muscle contraction and the glandular secretion. Your heart, no matter what you realize or you don't, it keeps beating on its own. Even your respiration, it doesn't ask your permission or you have no control over its working. Next you have the mixed nerves. Outside the spinal cord, sensory and motor nerves are enclosed within the same sheath of connective tissue called the mixed nerves. Inside the brain, inside the spinal cord, there are separate nerve tracts or separate nerve fibers for sensory nerve and for motor nerve. But once it is outside the spinal cord, the sensory and the motor nerve are enclosed within the same sheath of connective tissue and they are called as mixed nerves. In the spinal cord, the sensory and the motor nerves are arranged in separate groups. Next you have something called as neuron and glial cells. Neuron or nerve cell are all one term, because in your book the three different words are used. All these three represent only one single neuron. It conducts nerve impulses supported by connective tissue, and these connective tissue are called as glial cells. So neuron plus glial cells together is formed as neuroglia. What is neuroglia? Nothing but a neuron which is surrounded or supported by connective tissue forming the neuroglia. glia. Vast number of glial cells to fewer neurons are also seen. Stimulus can be initiated outside the body by touch and light waves. The stimulus inside the body is usually due to the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the blood that helps in respiration, or all the other change in the concentrations that take place in the blood. Next we are going to neuroglia. What is neuroglia? Neurons surrounded by connective tissue which is called as glial tissues together is called neuroglia. The neuron of the central nervous system are supported by 4 types of non-excitable glial cells that are outnumbering the neurons. One neuron will be surrounded by numerous thickness of connective tissue cells, the glial cells. Now there are 4 different types of glial cells that we are going to learn. First one is called the astrocytes. Next one is the oligodendrocytes. Then the next one is the ependymal cell, and then you have the microglial cell. Okay. First one is the astrocytes. The astrocytes, you can imagine it is more like a star shape with fine branching process. It lies in the mucopolysaccharide ground substance. You would have learnt about mucopolysaccharides in your school. What is a mucopolysaccharide? Mucopolysaccharide is more like your substances that are present in the tissue. The free end of some process, there is a swelling called the foot process. The foot process will be seen here at the free ends. They are found in large numbers adjacent to the blood vessels, with the foot process forming a sleeve. See, can you see the foot process here? These foot processes are seen in large numbers adjacent to the blood vessels, with the forming a sleeve around them. These foot processes will form more like a locking mechanism around the nerve. The blood vessel is separate from the neurons by capillary wall and a layer of astrocyte foot process which constitute the blood-brain barrier. Again, the blood-brain barrier was an important question in your last year question paper, so please learn it. The blood-brain barrier is a selective barrier that protects the brain from potential toxic and chemical substances in the blood. For example, if the blood gets poisoned also, the blood-brain barrier is a selective barrier which allows only certain amount of material to pass from the blood into the brain. So, this is the blood-brain barrier. The next one is the oligodendrocyte. They are smaller than the astrocyte and they are found in clusters around the nerve cell in the grey matter. They are smaller in size than the astrocytes and they are found in clusters in the grey matter. So what do you understand? They are found only in the grey matter. Where is the grey matter? The grey matter is found in the periphery of the brain and in the center of the spinal cord. So the oligodendrocytes will also be present in these areas. They are supportive in function along the length of the myelinated nerve. They form and maintain myelin having similar functions as the Schwann cells. Then you have the ependymal cell, the epithelial cell that line the cerebral cavities and the central canal. It produces and circulates the cerebrospinal fluid. It is found in these chambers. Where do you have cerebrospinal fluid? It is there in the brain and in the spinal cord. So the ependymal cells produce and circulate this cerebrospinal fluid. They form a structure with capillaries called the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus is also another important question which I have seen in your previous question papers. The choroid plexus is more like a net-like structure which are formed with the capillaries. Now, for your understanding, the cerebrospinal fluid is a colorless liquid that protects the brain and the spinal cord against the chemical and physical injuries. It carries oxygen, glucose and other necessary chemicals from the blood to neurons and the neuroglia. So cerebrospinal fluid is more like the shock absorber fluid for the brain and the spinal cord. Then you have the microglial cells. The microglial cells are derived from the monocyte that migrate from the blood into the nervous system. The blood produces monocyte and the microglia migrates from the blood and it into the nervous system and it forms the microglial cells. They are found in the areas of blood vessel. They enlarge and become phagocytic. The microglial cells, when they become big, they do the action of phagocytosis. What is phagocytosis? Phagocytosis is nothing but cleaning the unnecessary or unwanted cells. It more like a vacuum cleaner. It removes all the dirt. It removes microbes and damaged tissues. In areas of cell damage and in inflammation, there is more of microglial cells. Now, response of nerve tissue to an injury. Now, these four different types of nerve cells we have learnt. Nerve cells as in neuroglial cells. Now, how do they respond to a nerve in times of injury? Neurons reach maturity few weeks after birth and damage to neurons lead to rapid necrosis with sudden acute functional failure, slow atrophy with gradually increasing dysfunction. These changes are associated with hypoxia, anoxia. What is hypoxia? Loss of oxygen to the nerve cell. Anoxia is completely absent of oxygen. There is deficiency of nutrition, poisons, trauma, infection, aging and hypoglycemia. Even when you don't eat properly and when your brain doesn't have enough glucose, your nerves may not work properly. These are how there is peripheral nerve degeneration that takes place, different stages of nerve degeneration. These are happening when the astrocytes go in for fibrosis. We learned astrocytes are star-shaped cells. In severe and chronic condition, they undergo proliferation and later undergo atrophy, leading to fibrosis. What is fibrosis? Nothing but a fibrous layer that forms obstructing the function of the organ. Now, for example, there is a fibrosis that has taken place in the kidney, and see how there is narrowing of the muscle which will prevent it from functioning properly. This is a healthy cross section. This is what happens in cystic fibrosis. Oligodendrocytes, we learned, are smaller in size of the astrocytes. The increase in number around the degenerated neurons and they destroy and they are destroyed in the demyelinating disease. Multiple sclerosis are all these different diseases in which the oligodendrocytes can be destroyed. Then we have the microglial cells. We learned these cells are originated from the blood. And what happens when there is an inflammation, the cell destruction, the microglial cell increases in size and starts doing its action of phagocytosis. About the nerve and what are the connective tissues around the nerves, the types of neurons like bipolar, multipolar, unipolar, pseudo-unipolar, and we also learnt about the different connective tissues of the nerves, that is the glial cells, and what are the neuroglial cells we learnt, and we also learnt about the astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, the microglial cells, and with this we finish about the neurons. The nerve impulses, I will deal with it after we finish the central nervous system. Only if you understand how there is transmission, you will be able to understand the further classes. So with this, we will finish with neurons. In the next class, we will go with the central nervous system.